Good morning, all. My name is Kevin O'Reilly. I'm the National Sales Director and Director for Industry Practice Groups for Aon Australia. I'm also a member of the Aon Education Leadership Team responsible for providing advice and service to over 600 independent schools across Australia. On behalf of my colleagues and our guest partners, I want to thank you for taking time to join us for what is the first in a series of stimulating webinars that will run over the course of 2023. Aon is delighted to be able to facilitate and host these sessions, but of course none of this would be possible without your participation and without the participation and input of our expert guests from the Governing With and the Governance Institute of Australia. Now, just a note of administration, we'll leave questions to the end. There will be time for questions, a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And as we go along, you can put your questions into the chat forum that we'll be monitoring those. So without further ado, let me do the introductions. I'm delighted to be able to introduce today for all our listeners, two experts, and I'm sure you're going to gain so much from listening to them this morning. With me is Fee Mercer, who is the CEO of Governing With, and also Megan Motto. Megan's the CEO of Governance Institute of Australia. Fee and Megan, thank you both for joining us this morning and for giving us your time and your expertise to inform this session. I'll just do a brief piece on you both. Hopefully I don't embarrass you here. Fee, amongst her qualifications, she has her MBA, and I might point out, majored in governance and ethics. Fee is a governance review and development specialist for boards and directors with 30 years leadership experience, including work in the health and primary care, human services, education, and not-for-profit sectors. She is a highly sought-after chair, director, governance facilitator, speaker, and project manager. Fee has developed an award-winning online platform that over 600 boards and 6,000 directors have now participated in for their review and development programs. Producing powerful governance data insights for decision-making, it is now widely used across Australia in many sectors. She is a transformational leader in her current and past chair and director roles, as well as her roles as a founding director, CEO, and executive manager. Welcome, Fee. And not least, Megan. Megan Motto is Chief Executive Officer of Governance Institute of Australia, a national membership association and leading authority on governance. Megan drives the direction of the Institute that advocates for 43,000 governance and risk management professionals from the listed, unlisted, and not-for-profit sectors. Prior to her Governance Institute role, Megan was CEO of Consult Australia. Megan is also currently a director of Standards Australia, a national director for the Committee for Economic Development of Australia, and she's also a member of Chief Executive Women. Megan has a BA BEd, an MA in Communications Management, and is a fellow of both Governance Institute of Australia and the Australian Institute of Company Directors. So again, thank you both. We'll just move on to the next slide, please. Right, so just to touch on the series of monthly webinars which we have planned coming through the rest of the year. They're going to focus on interrogating and debating the governance issues that relate to the key risks as identified in the Aon 2022 Independent Schools Risk Report. Many of you will be familiar with this report and will recognize the dynamic changing risk environment surrounding the school sector. Indeed, over the last 2 years, we have seen a significant juggling of top risks, but equally significant has been the observation that school boards and executive leadership are facing a new set of challenges and evolving risks that collectively position good governance as a key competence for leadership groups at schools. Hopefully everyone on the call actually possesses a copy of the Aon Risk Report. If you don't, please reach out to your Aon representative and they'll make sure you get hold of one. Here's a reminder of the top 5 risks in the 2022 report. Now, some of you may well reflect on the fact that much of your cost of risk outlay these days is given over to property insurance, which has obviously increased substantially in the last few years. And indeed, school assets have grown, expanded, and are of course still critical to the operation of any school. But the non-physical asset risks, not unlike other sectors, have also come to the fore, such as the battle for talent, succession planning, cyber, of course, which is a regular point of discussion in public forum, and student safety, not least, which, although not a new risk, is taking different forms by way of events occurring from that risk. So today's discussion will relate to how schools should seek to apply good governance practices in relation to managing these top risks. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Fee and Megan to get us going.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Hello, Megan. It's lovely to see you again.
Hello, Fee, and thanks, Kevin, and thank you all for participating. It's great.
It's terrific.
Great.
So,
yeah, Fee, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so Kevin, we're looking forward to having a really important high-level discussion about your fantastic risk report. Kevin, you've been doing that risk report for quite a long time now, and it really does give great insight into the things that schools can really focus on for 2023. We're going to talk today about the evolving risk landscape, types of risk for 2023, and how to do, how to functionally manage that risk.
So maybe, Fee, Megan, I can kind of kick off here with the first question to get things moving around the evolving risk landscape. So interestingly, myself and my Aon colleagues, when we look at the risk survey outputs, we tend to look at it through our own particular prism. But I'm curious to know how both of you, and Megan, maybe you can start with this one, view the changing risk landscape for schools in 2023, particularly in relation, of course, to the top 5 risks that we've identified in the survey.
Thanks, Kevin. And look, I might just start also by acknowledging that, albeit that I'm not quite got the harbour views that you can see in my Zoom background, I am on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here in Sydney, and I do pay my acknowledgement and respect to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise the custodianship of our First Nations people to the land, so where I am and where all of you are around Australia, I guess. Look, it's probably not a surprise to anyone that the result difference between 2020 and 2022 is the COVID flavour. And so it's a pretty obvious shift in the landscape that's occurred over the last 3 years. But really interestingly, I look at how COVID right across the risk landscape has really intensified some of the risks that we're already seeing as a trend in market, particularly around the people and the digital side of things. And it's these weren't trends that weren't already in market. They were evolving well before 2020, but COVID acted as a massive accelerant to those sorts of risks. And that's what you're seeing in the results of 2022. 4 out of the 5 top risks are human risks. They've got to do with human welfare, with your people management. So all of those risks are very much interrelated in COVID. I thought I'd just speak really quickly around the COVID effect that has occurred. And I kind of put them into 3 silos, given the top 5 risks that the Aon survey has identified. The first is the talent risks. And clearly in the survey, you've identified, the costs to the talent pool of migration and the caps on migration coming in, obviously retirements, early retirements, people not adapting to the new landscape and choosing for health reasons or for not wanting to pick up the digital learning piece. They've moved out of the sector, career changes. It's all too hard. It's been a very, very stressful time for the sector. But also the change in, so that's, you've got the kind of talent in the personnel, just the numbers, the teachers themselves, but also it's the top tier talent question that's really evolved as a result of COVID, because what we found in COVID was the crisis management that needed to occur wasn't something that a lot of organisations had planned for. And I'll come back to that in a moment. What that meant was that the incredible pressure on leaders to make decisions in real time, to adapt continually, to be communicating continually, those sorts of pressures really were a real mixing pot to understand what leadership looked like. And it wasn't that you can just do your job really well and manage other people. It was that you had the skills around dynamism and evolving talent and evolving decision-making. So that crisis of leadership really over the top of just the general population decline in terms of teachers has really put pressure on the landscape in terms of talent. Of course, The second pillar I talk about is the health aspect, and the report really strongly shows the emerging, Kevin, you mentioned it, the emerging nature of the physical health risks and the physical safety risks, but also the mental health crisis that's emerged through COVID-19, through those increasing pressures. And we're going to see some scarring, particularly for not just the student populations, but the teacher populations, the talent populations. We're going to see a lot of scarring for the next decade or so coming out of that. I know that we've seen a lot of students that are very anxious about returning as teachers, who are anxious about returning to physical environments, etc. So there's going to be a lot of scarring, and we need to think about that lag effect. And the third, of course, is the massive intensification of the online environment, which meant that the cyber risk has increased tenfold. So we're really seeing all of those things play in combination. Overarching all of that, we've really seen over the past 3 years a shift in focus from what I will call hard risks, that is risks around, you mentioned, construction, infrastructure, physical risks, tangible risks, partially because the mitigants to those risks, they're more tried and true, they're easier to recognise. A lot of the mitigants, you mentioned insurance, they're insurable. And there's a much more causal link between the mitigants and the risks themselves. Transition that across to more the human side, and those risks are a lot what I call the soft risks. Risks around culture, ethics, reputation. They're a lot harder to manage. The mitigants are not, they're correlational rather than causal, and then they've got a much longer run. So, you know, you hear those words, it takes a lifetime to develop reputation, it can take seconds to destroy it. So that's where a lot of the focus needs to be, partially because it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to manage. And the final piece I'd say about that is that comes down to the increase in community expectations. The proximity between the community now and leadership has just reduced incredibly. You know, I can write an email to the Prime Minister. So you don't have to go through layers and layers and layers and write a letter and wait for weeks for it to get responded to and all the rest of it. You know, principals will be feeling the pressure direct from parents and everything in between. So the community expectation is that all of those risks will be managed. And the hard risks that I mentioned before, the community expectation is that's almost bread and butter risks. We expect you to know how to manage that. So the community expectation really has shifted over to these soft risks around the quality of the teacher workforce, around the quality. You know, the parents are saying, why have my kids got casual teachers all the time? How is the school managing those risks of the workforce? So look, I'll stop there, but I think that really does reflect, it's the overarching shift in the landscape, right from the business community, who's also worried about talent and retention recruitment, but it really has exacerbated those risks for the schooling sector. And I think that's what you've seen in the 2022 report results.
Yeah. Thanks, Megan. Fee, comments before we move on to the next slide?
Yeah. We'll go on to the next slide. Sorry, Kevin.
Yeah, sure.
Kevin was asking about Fee. What's your overarching feel for?
Oh, look, I honestly, it's
2020
really
to now?
interesting. On the back of Megan, what you've been talking about, what's really interesting is, having been involved with Aon for so many years, in the last risk report, right up there in the top 5, number 1 was reputation. Pretty much close behind that was governance. And what's really interesting in my observation, Kevin, is this real zeroing in now on what are the key elements that actually governance now needs to address, and what are the key elements that are truly impacting on our reputation. And they are, without a shadow of a doubt, the 5 things that your marvellous report has identified. And what I can bring to the table to this discussion, Megan and Kevin, is with all of the other sectors that we're working with as well. So not just education, health, human services, all of the government regulated, heavily regulated boards and their workforces. It is exactly the same issues. They are around workforce and they are around people's mental health. And how do we actually, as boards, support our executive to actually support our staff, or to attract, engage and retain our staff moving forward? And it's really interesting, everyone, because at the same time, we've added to our surveys questions both as a whole board. What do you know about environmental social governance? And the same question we've added to your skills. What do you have any skills in this area? And the reason we've done that is because there are two things that profoundly impact on our ability to sustain and work towards people matters in the future. And one is understanding our footprint, which is around environmental issues, which impacts on schools constantly. And our second one is our handprint, which relates exactly to all the social and people issues. And so you, as the education sector, are feeling this exact same thing. So let's have a look at some of the other areas that Megan
Thanks,
and
Fee,
I
for that. Yeah.
can talk about to help with that.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. That's an interesting terminology, footprint and handprint. Handprint, I must remember that. But also I might observe that, Fee, when we first started working with you, partnering with your firm some years ago now, you and I talked, it's interesting how my observation anyway, the governance at that time, it was very built around compliance and I have to do these things. Whereas now it's come full bore into the whole spectrum and operation of our communities and our environment. So it's becoming more complex and overwhelming and challenging. Just to kick on to this question of categories of risks and profiles. So we're moving into 2023. All of us are surfacing, somewhat from a very, heavy period of uncertainty and turbulence. So what categories of risk do you envisage will be key areas of focus and governance for schools in the coming year? So whichever one of you wants to choose to run first. Megan, you're leaning forward, so.
Sure, I'll kick off. That's fine. Look, I think that, the overarching trend, of course, is the continued and escalating emphasis on risk management and the expectation of the community that the board is looking at risk, managing risk, understanding risk, and being proactive in this environment. Just to look at another sector, the recent events of Star Casino in Sydney, and where the board is being asked, not only, it's not whatever you've done in risk management, it's not good enough. You needed to lean in further. And there is an expectation that boards will be leaning into risk management and really understanding it in a very proactive way. That means not just having a risk management plan and allocating it to someone, but it means really looking at scenario planning, looking at not just having the scenarios planned out, but testing your response against them. So schools are very good at testing evacuations, you do your fire drills and whatnot, but are schools doing because right across the business community, they weren't, and I can tell you from our surveying that these plans were not being tested. Are you planning for and running a scenario test on a cyber threat, on a cyber scenario instance? Are you running threats around a reputational damage issue or a student welfare issue? So you really need to be not just having a plan for these scenarios, but testing it in real life, because the functionality of plans is always subject to human behavior. And it's the human behavior that you actually have to test in advance so that you know what the likely responses are. Is someone going to go off running to the media inappropriately, etc.? So we really need to be thinking about that. In terms of the shifting landscape, the other thing I think that's really important to get ahead of the curve. So we've been very reactionary over the last couple of years because of the external shock of COVID. And now we're seeing that shock dissipating somewhat. There's going to be, still, as I said, some scarring from COVID, both in terms of mental health, physical health. Long COVID is going to be a really big issue across. We're now seeing that are there medical complications that come out of a result of long COVID, and the correlational links between those are only just starting to be established in the medical community. But the other shocks that we can see externally coming at the moment, obviously the economic shocks of slowdown, worldwide slowdown in the economy, supply chain shocks that will mean increasing in prices, increasing in salaries because of the workforce shocks. So really thinking about those external forces and what they might mean then to your internal inherent kind of risk profile, what they will mean for the costs of building infrastructure, the costs of managing infrastructure. Construction companies are going under pretty regularly at the moment, thinking about all of those things, and including thinking about the way that federal policy will shift given the new Labor government. So, understanding those and having conversations, some blue sky conversations about what are the drivers of risk before you look at the incidents themselves. But then, of course, you have to be thinking about then how they will affect your business. And I think of that also in two categories. You've kind of got the proactive risks, which we've listed here on the slide. That's your action plans that you have for running your project managing your infrastructure program, or running, your action plans for retention strategies or whatever it might be. But we also need to be thinking about something very different, and they're two different techniques. So one is the action plan that you have to proactively manage a known risk. The other one is not an action plan, but a framework for decision making. And that's really what governance is about. It's a framework for decision making for an unknown risk or a risk with unknown parameters. And I'll give you an example of that. So a lot of discussion was had around ransomware. Will we pay ransomware? We'll have a policy around ransomware. Will we pay? Will we not pay? And a lot of organizations took a very ethical, proactive position. We will not fund terrorism. We will not fund a ransomware attack. But when you're in the depth of the moment and you have your fiduciary responsibilities as a board, depending on what the ask is, it's a very different conversation, a very nuanced conversation. So you can't necessarily make a black and white action plan up front for that decision. What you have to have is a framework for being able to make that decision very quickly at point in time. And that's what I mean about the reactive nature of risk management. So I think that schools really should be thinking about all of those aspects of risk management, and we'll get on to a little bit more about how boards get their head around all of this, because it is quite a lot of detail.
Thanks, Meg. And it's Phoebe, interested in your viewpoints on how you see the risk framework, because we've certainly evolved from a stage a few years ago where we took the view, if you can see it, you can manage it, whereas now it's become a lot vaguer and more complex. So Phoebe, over to you.
Yes, exactly. And look, Kevin, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, when we first started working, it was an entirely different prescriptive landscape. But something that Megan and I talk about all the time, and that is fundamentally, as directors, when it comes to risk, it starts with understanding the organisation. And, risk before was kind of a blueprint, as you said, a compliance-driven document. But the secret that we've all discovered in governance is that it's actually about understanding the organisation. And if you really do understand your organisation, for example, you understand that in education, curriculum matters, talent matters, student and teacher, staff and wellbeing matters. What boards have got to get their heads around now when it comes to risk is they are not just the responsibility of the executive team. They're actually your responsibility as a director as well, because you need to know how does it happen on a day-to-day basis, and then how do you translate that up to high-level, top trended information. And what Megan and I have observed is that over COVID, it was really hard as a new director to understand the business, because you weren't ever able to do that walk around, that, feel the culture by walking in the door, by how somebody greeted you, by observing how the teachers were with the kids. So what we would argue is that it's still the same thing that a board is responsible for. What's incredibly different is what the top risks are. So that's kind of my observation.
Thanks, Faye. Yeah, just jumping to in terms of how we kind of, I suppose, manage risk. We've addressed the changing risk landscape, and we've looked at the kind of categories of risk that we might anticipate that could flow through this year. What does that look like in practice for school boards and the executive leadership team? So I might ask you both to jump into that one.
Great. Well, I might start with this one. This is a bit of a passion of mine at the moment, and I know it is of Megan's as well, so we can both start on this one. But one of the things that we've really been discovering is that we need to start using some of the vehicles that were set up in governance structures to actually manage risk. or oversee risk a hell of a lot better. Whilst we're going to be talking in far greater depth about some of these topics across the year, Kevin, my observation is that we need to get board subcommittees doing a lot more around managing risk. We need to delegate in their terms of reference what is the risk and what is the piece of strategy that they are responsible for. And we need to actually say that they are also responsible for people issues. The biggest mistake you can make is getting people issues mixed up with your audit, risk and finance. People's issues really do matter. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of organisations put people risks around environmental, social governance under their remuneration and REMS committee because they are responsible for engagement. And these are issues of engagement. I've noticed the boards, Megan, have forgotten how to say to the principal, you know, what happened in those exit interviews? What are those things that really do point to people issues? What are we like around social inclusion? What's even happening around here? And of course, what Megan and I are seeing is the real need, and this is a real focus of our partnerships together, is it's no point in just working with the board. It's the executive and the board together that are building these skills and helping each other how to manage them.
Yeah, look, I'll add to that. I think that's absolutely right, Fee, and we've talked about that a lot before. So I said before that expectation from regulators, from the government, from school communities themselves is that boards will be more proactive and reach in. So it's certainly not, I'm sure that every director that's sitting on this particular webinar knows this is not a CV filler job. This is a real job. Directors have fiduciary responsibilities. Your house is on the line. And you need to lean in. That doesn't mean there's time in the board meeting itself to do all of that work. And that's why you have to use functional subcommittees to do the work. Fee's pointed out that you need to have a really strong people committee to think about things like succession planning, talent and retention, etc. All those people issues I talked about before. And the other thing that we're seeing with finance, risk and audit committees, and in fact, even my own organisation, we're thinking now about shifting the name of that committee to a farms committee. That's finance, audit, risk management and security. So that's really capturing your cyber risk as well. So that's something that organisations really need to be thinking about doing. And then underneath those committees, that's where the detailed work occurs. Those committees need to be making sure that they've got access to the right expertise, whether that's upskilling themselves, upskilling the executive with regards to their understanding of how to functionally manage risk, but also having them be truly accountable and understanding that the shift in accountability around this is really quite seismic. Boards increasingly are being told, and they are having to say to their executives, don't tell me, show me. Show me the risk appetite statement. Show me the documentation. Show me your risk management plans. We don't need to do the doing, but we need to absolutely hold you accountable that we know that all of those processes are in place and robust. That is the role of the board. And unfortunately, we've still got this, trust me, it'll be okay, we're managing that, but the board have to reach in and physically have a look at these documents and make sure that they're part of the process.
And you can do that at those board subcommittees. And also, Megan, a big thing I've noticed is the real need for those subcommittees to report in a proper dashboard way. No longer is it acceptable, everybody, to receive the subcommittee minutes. That's about as much use as an astronomer motorbike. I mean, honestly, it's hopeless. You've got to actually empower our committee leaders or chairs to be able to speak to what are the top risks that this committee is overseeing and what are the trends that this committee is seeing. And that makes directors assured, but it also makes executives assured.
Okay, thank you both. I'm watching the clock here because it's running away on us, and I feel like we could go on for another half an hour on this, but at least it's giving people a flavour of what's going to come in the months ahead. Questions, so we have a bit of time for questions if you want to put them in on the chat forum. But look, we're running out of time, and I suspect people are watching the clock for themselves. They've got busy days. I might ask you both just get one question going to flow things. Is post-pandemic, what can schools do to look after student and staff welfare?
Look, I'll jump in on this one. I think it's a really interesting one. I used to be a school teacher. I know what it's like. The number one focus is always on student welfare, because everyone is so intrinsically motivated in the schools communities, and it's all about the students. But I think boards really have to take the responsibility to take that one step up and say, actually, it's got to be all about the teachers first and foremost, and shift a little bit of the focus to the teachers. Make sure that you're spending enough time on teacher welfare. Wasn't it Richard Branson that said, my most important stakeholders are not my customers? Every retailer says, oh, the customer's the most important. He said, no, my staff are the most important, because if I've got the right staff and they're really happy, they will facilitate phenomenal customer experiences. So I need to worry about the staff first. And I think that schools have to spend enough time and really ask themselves, are we spending enough time on succession planning, teacher development, talent retention, all of those things, because they will facilitate happy students at the end of the day. And I do think my experience in schools is that we can get so wrapped up with student welfare because of those external pressures, particularly coming from the parents, that we forget about the teachers and about celebrating those teacher success journeys as well. Celebrating the reasons that you've got sticky talent in your school, celebrating fantastic teachers that you want to keep, advertising them, putting them in the local paper about some of the initiatives they're running. So one thing that I would really think about is focusing on the people who in fact are your line workers. They have the most important job, not just in terms of the delivery of outcomes, but also the creation of the culture, which facilitates the longer term outcomes as well.
Thanks, Megan. One of the, yeah, go on, Fee, go.
No, I was just going to add to that what Megan was talking about, because what our surveys show us is that basically the easiest job that the board can have, it's irrelevant of your skills, is to ensure that everything that happens at the school lives and breathes the purpose and the values of the organisation. The biggest word that I keep hearing now is hypocrisy. And what staff hate and don't like and feel let down about, and this is where the mental health and the illness comes in, is they feel that we have these beautiful strategic plans and these wonderful values and philosophies, particularly those of the organisations that are faith-based, and yet when you actually work in them, it couldn't be more the opposite. Make it your task to do something about that. You don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar to change that. And that makes a profound difference, I can tell you.
Thanks.
Sorry, Kevin.
Right, I'm gonna put you on the clock here for this second question, then because we do want to just run into a final few slides. It'll just take a minute or so. But so busy world for schools. We've listened to you. Extremely dynamic, challenging, complex. Decision making is becoming tougher for boards and for the executive team. If you were the principal or the chairperson of the school, what would be the top 3 steps you would take tomorrow to ensure the school enjoys good active governance in relation to the managing of the environment that you've just described, both of you? So that's a very hard question, and you're on the clock a little bit. So
I'm happy to jump in, and I'll try and be really quick. The first thing I'd be doing is having a look at the board agenda and saying, where is risk? Is it the after lunch session where everyone's wanting to fall asleep, or is it a real focus of the board? The second thing that I'd have a look at, and sorry, just to go hand in hand with that, is does the board understand its risk appetite, and have they really thought about the risk appetite? So that's a really important aspect. The second is there a very clear delineation and delegation of where risk management sits in the executive, and are those people appropriately skilled? That's absolutely critical. And the third thing that I will say to you is start at the back. When we're doing risk management planning, oftentimes disaster recovery, crisis management plans, they're sort of like, oh, we'll do those at the end. My suggestion is that you should pull those out of the desk if you have one. If you don't have one, you should start thinking about them right now, and start with your disaster recovery first. What happens in the event of X? Start with those documents first, because they'll be incredibly enlightening.
And Megan, just to add to that, Kevin, this is me from a governance perspective. Governance is incredibly complex. You have to work under a really strong framework, a corporate governance framework, and there are really strong requirements of you as a school for the education sector. I'll be doing a quick look at yourself. Where do you sit to that framework? Where are the gaps? And then do a priority list of what are we focusing on first? What's the thing that will completely support addressing the attraction and retention of staff? What are the things that will immediately address and support the mental health, the cyber, and so on? The biggest tip I can give everyone is to get rid of a lot of what we used to do and focus on those top risks, because we're just doing too much.
Okay, thanks both. We'll just jump forward. I want to just give people a flavor of, we're nearly finished, and look, it's good that we have pretty much all of our participants still with us. That's encouraging. So in February, we're kind of looking at the 22nd of February, date to be firmed up. This will be the next topic in the series, which is really focusing on high functioning talent, retaining them, attracting them, and what is the board's role. So that's just a preview of what's going to happen. You'll be getting invites to that shortly, and hopefully we can see you attending, and we'll have, I think Fee and Megan are back again, I'm not sure, but we'll confirm the speakers at that time. So just moving on to the next slide, I'm going to do a bit of promotion for them both. If you can, we're going to promote and advertise to you. There's a special offering which is available, a combined offer from Govern With and the Governance Institute of Australia, which I think will be very valuable for schools to look at and possibly take up. Fee, did you want to just spend a quick few seconds on explaining this?
Yes, certainly. Well, I think Megan and I both talked to this, but Megan and my passion is that we, don't just look at governance from an evaluation perspective or just an education perspective. We passionately believe in that continuous cycle of development that starts with planning, evaluation, development, and then continuing to do it. We passionately believe that you do that as a whole board, as individual directors, and as executives as well. So we've worked together for years now, and we have successfully found in many areas that if you have a package where you actually do review yourself as a board, as a director, as an executive, under the framework that you're meant to be working at an education level, and then you have the right education, you can honestly become a high functioning board continuously. The secret is continuously, not just one off.
Yeah, so look, similar to Fee, the importance of evaluation and education go hand in hand. You're going to pick the wrong course if you don't know where your gaps are. So that assessment is a really important part. But look, many boards will understand and appreciate where some of their gaps are even already. So that cycle can start simultaneously. The Governance Institute is the world leader in governance training in terms of Australia. We both internationally certification and we are a university TEXA regulated entity ourselves, but our short courses and certificates, which we'd really encourage participants to get a hold of, range across a really broad spectrum. 18, we've got another 2 that are going live, one on cyber risk actually just going live over the next couple of months. So they're really things that are going to upskill people and give them the tools to be more confident in their decision making and more confident in having conversations that matter.
Great. And I've seen the, yeah, so I was just going to say, I've seen some of the descriptive outputs and it looks very, very impressive. And I'm sure when you have that, when schools reach out to you, it'll be very, very informing for them. Sorry, Fee.
No, it's just saying after today, we'll be sending everybody a copy of this webinar and lots of information. So we're going to be very helpful. Yeah,
just to reaffirm, we have recorded this. We will be sharing the copy of the webinar with everybody who's in attendance and other schools as well who couldn't make it. So it'll be widely available. And just remember that we will be promoting the series of webinars for the rest of the year. So you'll be aware of it when they're happening, who's talking, what it's about. And I'm sure this has been a good flavor for you as to how attractive it is. So with that, I'm going to say a final note of big thanks to everyone for attending. Thank you, Fee and Megan, for all you've done here. It's been wonderful having you talk to us. It's been so beneficial and informative. We look forward to talking again. As I said, we have recorded it. And thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.